Growing up, I always thought my childhood home was special. It was an old Victorian house that had been in the family for generations. The creaky wooden floors, the faded wallpaper, the vintage furniture. It was also nostalgic, but there was something else too, something strange. It started when I was about 10 years old. My bedroom was at the end of a long hallway on the second floor. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs. My parents were already asleep, and I knew it wasn't them. The footsteps got louder and louder until they stopped right outside my door. I remember lying in bed, holding my breath, listening. Then, as if someone was standing just inches away, I heard a whisper. "Are you awake?" I was frozen with fear. I didn't answer, and after a few minutes, the footsteps slowly retreated down the hallway. When I finally worked up the courage to check, the hallway was empty, and my parents were sound asleep. From that night on, the footsteps came regularly, always stopping outside my door, always followed by that same whisper. My parents brushed it off, saying it was just the old house settling or the wind. But I knew better. Over the years, I got used to the nighttime visits. They became part of my life, an unsettling routine. But things escalated when I turned 16. One night, as I lay in bed reading, I heard the familiar footsteps. But this time, they didn't stop outside my door. They kept coming closer until they were right beside my bed. I didn't dare move. My heart was pounding as I felt the presence leaning over me. And then, a cold hand brushed my cheek. I bolted upright, turning on the light, but there was nothing there. Just the stillness of the night and my own racing heartbeat. After that incident, the visits became more aggressive. I'd wake up to find objects moved around my room. Books stacked in odd patterns, my wardrobe doors hanging open, strange symbols drawn in the dust on my dresser. I tried to tell my parents, but they insisted I was just imagining things. Maybe they didn't want to believe that our beautiful old home could be haunted. A few weeks later, I found an old family photo album in the attic. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, one picture caught my eye. It was a group photo taken in our backyard, decades before I was born. There were my grandparents, my aunts and uncles as kids, and standing in the back, a figure that seemed somehow familiar. It was a young man with hollow eyes and a faint smile. I'd never seen him before, but something about him struck a chord of recognition. I asked my mother about the man, and her face went pale. She told me he was a distant cousin named Samuel, a troubled young man who had stayed with the family years ago before mysteriously disappearing one night. Rumor had it that he was unstable, often talking about seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices. They'd written him off as delusional. But he'd vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and rumors. I couldn't shake the feeling that Samuel's spirit was still in the house, haunting me for reasons I didn't understand. One night, I was lying in bed when I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were faster, almost frantic, like someone running down the hallway. The footsteps burst into my room, and suddenly, the temperature dropped. I felt a weight pressing down on my chest, as though something was trying to hold me down. Paralyzed with fear, I struggled to breathe. I could feel a presence, like someone was lying beside me, their cold breath brushing against my face. And then I heard it. The whisper. They didn't believe me either. The voice was raspy, filled with anger and sadness. I managed to break free, scrambling out of bed and running down the hall to my parents' room. I tried to explain what had happened, but they dismissed it as a nightmare. I was on my own. In the following days, I started digging into Samuel's past, hoping to understand what he'd gone through. I found an old journal of his, tucked away in the attic. His entries were chaotic, filled with rants about being watched, about hearing voices calling his name. One entry, written just days before he disappeared, sent chills down my spine. It read, "They think I'm mad, but I know the truth. Something dark lives in this house. It wants me, and soon, it'll want them too." I didn't sleep for days. I was terrified that whatever had driven Samuel mad was coming for me too. A few nights later, I heard the footsteps again. They came quickly, almost running, until they stopped right outside my door. I sat up, bracing myself for whatever was about to happen, but this time it was different. I heard a knock, single, deliberate knock. And then, in that same cold, distant whisper, "Let me in," that was it. I packed my bags and moved out the next day, going to live with my grandparents until I could figure out my next steps. I left that house, and I left Samuel, or whatever was left of him, behind. Years later, my parents finally sold the house. They told me they'd heard rumors from the new owners. Stories of footsteps, whispers in the night. They tried to laugh it off, calling it an overactive imagination. But I knew better. Samuel, or whatever haunted that house, wasn't finished. I often wonder if he's still there, waiting for someone else to believe his story.